Now, 2001 is one of the most famous and important movies of all time, and in my opinion, the greatest movie of all time. Now, that is not an unpopular opinion, so much so there's a video with over 300k views on YouTube talking about why they think it's the greatest movie. But in that video, they talk about the surface narrative and how the movie is about humans evolving into another level of species, the Star Child, at the end of the movie. But as Kubrick has stated before, that is just the surface level narrative. Now, why do I think it's the greatest film ever made? First of all, the visual effects. Now, at the time these effects were groundbreaking. This is due to the movie being funded by companies like NASA, which allowed realistic technology to be used for the movie in order to promote space travel. Which is why when watching the movie today it holds up better than most movies that came after, and of course at the time. Like the original Star Wars trilogy, and other sci-fi movies from the time. This is also due to the spaceships in the movie moving slow. While in other movies like Star Trek the Motion Picture, or of course Star Wars, they move faster, but the technology has aged poorly. 2001 still has some of the greatest uses of visual and special effects, like the Stargate sequence, that to this day is still incredible and as trippy as it probably was during the late 60s. My next point is Hal. Hal, in my opinion, might be film's greatest villain. Now, throughout the movie, it's made increasingly clear Hal is the villain. This is clearly shown by him killing Frank Poole, killing their fellow crewmates who are in hypersleep, the main conflict of the film being Dave against Hal, or essentially man vs machine. But why do I think Hal is so great? Well, first, he's iconic. In order to be considered a great villain, in my opinion, you need to have some sort of impact in your respective medium. And to be greater if you transcend the medium. Hal does this, and has inspired countless villains, like the main villain of the Portal series, GLaDOS, and the main villain from the animated movie, Mitchells and the Machines, Pow, a not so subtle nod to Hal. Hal's villainy is elevated by the performance from the late Canadian actor Douglas Rain, who in some people's opinion brings a human quality to Hal, as most people see Hal as the most sympathetic character in the film, which I disagree with. But Douglas's performance is menacing, as he's basically only able to use the same monotone voice and pitch through the entire film, but you can still hear his anger and his fear of death, like when Dave is trying and eventually succeeds to disconnect him, where you can hear the panic in Hal's voice.
Greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission, and I want to help you.
Thing is that Hal is a great villain, and was one of the first villains to show the downside of AI. Now, obviously, as stated before, he is able to kill the entire crew apart from Bowman, and Hal is able to do this as he was given access to total control of the ship. Now, the character of Hal implies that Kubrick feared AI. This point is backed up by the iconic scene of Open the Pod Bay's Doors, where when Bowman is doing the infamous Kubrick stare, has the letters IBM reflected on his face. IBM was a huge organisation that funded for the film, and are a massive technology company who programmed the first ever singing computer, which is also in the film when Dave is able to kill/de-evolve Hal.
It's called Daisy. 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 Give me your answer, do.
So perhaps Kubrick was telling us as the audience to be afraid of AI, which is obviously not a unique message, but due to, as of this video being recorded, the AI generated voice where you can make a celebrity sing a song shows that Kubrick's fears are likely coming true, just not as quickly as he thought they would. My final point is the ending. Now, in my opinion, this ending is possibly the greatest human ending in film history. Let me elaborate. Bowman is able to kill Hal. Technically, in my opinion, the evolving Hal. The slowdown effect on Hal's voice suggests he is becoming more like a baby, unable to speak. Also shows the audience that Hal is not a sympathetic character, and that he is mechanically, artificially made by humans, not natural. And the way in which Dave kills Hal is with one of the simplest tools, a screwdriver, which is a parallel to the bone that Moonwatcher, the ape at the beginning of the movie, uses to kill his enemies, thus creating the first weapon. So, the ending. Now there are two main interpretations, both of which are great and fantastic. The first is the most obvious one, is that Dave Bowman was transported to a different dimension during the Stargate sequence, in which he watches his life until he eventually reaches his deathbed, where he sees the monolith, and the camera pans through the monolith, and Dave is reborn as the Star Child, and has returned to Earth, to do whatever you think he's going to do. Though in the novel it is stated he returns to Earth and destroys all nuclear weapons, basically granting world peace. There is even an interview in which Kubrick talks about the ending.
The idea was supposed to be that he is taken in by godlike entities, creatures of pure energy and intelligence with no shape or form. And they put him in what I suppose you could describe as a human zoo, and to study him. And his whole life passes from that point on in that room, and he has no sense of time. It just seems to happen as it does in the film. And they choose this room, which is a very inaccurate replica of French architecture, deliberately so inaccurate, because one was suggesting that they had some idea of something that he might think was pretty, but weren't quite sure, just as we aren't quite sure what to do in zoos with animals to try to give them what we think is their natural environment. And anyway, when they get finished with him, as happens in so many myths of all cultures in the world, he is transformed into some kind of super being and sent back to Earth, transformed and made, into some sort of Superman, and we have to only guess what happens when he goes back. It is the pattern of a great deal of mythology, and that was what we were trying to suggest.
And the other interpretation is one made by film analyzer and YouTuber Collative Learning, also known as Rob Ager, whose videos explaining the ending, and has written an article about the whole film discussing what he thinks the movie is about. But in his interpretation, I preface his, Dave realises that he is in a movie. This is indeed backed up by Dave looking into the camera in this scene. And in this one, at the actual end of the movie. And the baby represents Dave's intellectual rebirth. The baby obviously implying Dave has been reborn into something other than his current state, aka being human. I think this interpretation is, in my opinion, a far more satisfying ending than the first, but nonetheless they are both incredible. So there is, in my opinion, the greatest movie of all time. I think 2001 is the most ambitious a movie has ever gotten, considering we go from the birth of man to a birth of a new species. Whether it's its incredible and timeless special effects, its terrific and iconic score, or whether it's its terrific cinematography, or whether it's its anti-AI pro-human ending, it is, in my opinion, a perfect film and the greatest film to ever be made.